Stand at a level crossing sometime and look down the track as it narrows toward the horizon. Hidden between those two rails is a number, 4 feet, 8.5 inches. Measure it yourself and something about it feels off. Not 5 feet, not 1.5 meters, 4 feet 8, and then 1 extra half inch, as though somebody approached a clean round figure and lost their nerve at the last moment. Yet that precise measurement, down to the final half inch, defines the width of roughly 60% of the railways on Earth. China, the bulk of Europe, North America, all rolling on the same strangely exact gap. Ride a subway beneath almost any major city, watch a tram thread a European street, follow a mile-long freight across Nebraska, and odds are the wheels beneath all of them sit exactly that far apart. Surely somebody picked it. And everybody thinks they know who. The Romans. War chariots sized to a pair of horses, grinding ruts into Roman roads. Ruts that English carts had to match. Dimensions the earliest railways then inherited. It ranks among the internet's best-loved facts. Except for one issue. Almost none of it is true. And what actually happened is stranger than the legend, because nobody ever concluded this number was correct. It's an accident that got written into law. Here's how. Begin with why the figure is puzzling at all. Nobody designing a railway from a blank sheet today would arrive at 4 feet 8.5 inches. No principle of physics leads there. Broader track allows higher speeds and greater stability, something engineers grasped from the beginning. Back in the 1830s, Isambard Kingdom Brunel laid out the Great Western Railway on a 7-foot gauge precisely to capture those advantages. And Brunel had reasons, not whims. A wider footprint meant a lower center of gravity, room for bigger driving wheels, and a steadier ride at speed. Passengers said his Great Western ran like a billiard table, thanks partly to Brunel laying his rails on continuous timber balks instead of ordinary crossties, and in head-to-head running, his broad-gauge locomotives repeatedly embarrassed their narrow rivals. Through the 1840s, his Exeter Expresses were plausibly the fastest scheduled trains on the planet. So, the dimension the world converged on wasn't even the strongest performer on offer. It is not a tidy figure in feet, and in metric, it is anything but round. 1,435 millimeters. Which is exactly what makes the Roman explanation so seductive. It resolves all that oddness in a single elegant line. The legend runs like this. Rome laid the first long straight highways across Europe. Roman war chariots, supposedly built to one military specification, carved the original ruts. Any cart that followed had to match the spacing or shatter its wheels. Many centuries on, the men laying the first wagonways simply reused that inherited wheel spacing, meaning the distance between modern rails is really the distance between two Roman warhorses. The legend even finishes with a punchline involving the space shuttle, and we'll come to that. A flawless story. Also a false one. Watch it collapse one link at a time. Take the chariots first. Rome's army never went into battle on war chariots. On the battlefield, they had been obsolete for centuries by the time the legions conquered anything. Rome won its wars with armored infantry and cavalry, so there simply was no standardized Roman war chariot to measure. Next, there was no unified Roman gauge either. Across the empire, road widths were never fixed to a single dimension, and the surviving cart ruts, the ones still measurable at Pompeii, don't match the railway figure in any case. Walk different Roman sites and the rut spacing wanders from place to place, because the traffic that carved them was farm carts, merchant wagons, and carriages of every description, not a fleet built to one blueprint. The empire standardized its coinage and its road's direction of travel. It never standardized the axles rolling over them. If Rome didn't fix the number, then who did? Mostly one man, George Stephenson. His early working life unfolded around the collieries of England's northeast, where horse-drawn wagons were already rolling on rails, and those colliery wagonways happened to run at roughly 4 feet 8 inches. A local custom, nothing grander, and one that predated him. The wooden wagonways serving those pits had been carrying coal to the river for the better part of a century before he arrived. Stephenson was the engine wright at Killingworth Colliery, where he built his first locomotive, the Blucher, in 1814, sized to the track already under his feet. 15 years later, at the Rainhill Trials of 1829, his rocket outperformed every competitor and made his workshop the default supplier to a brand new industry, which meant his inherited colliery measurement was about to become everybody's measurement. Stephenson took that gauge with him to the Stockton and Darlington Railway, then to the Liverpool and Manchester line. On that second railway, he nudged each rail outward by about 1/4 of an inch, adding 1/2 an inch overall. The usual explanation is simple. It kept the wheels from binding as trains ran through curves. That small fudge, applied so a train could take a bend more smoothly, is the most likely origin of the famous 1/2 inch. Sit with that for a moment. The most universal dimension in modern transport, the gauge more than half the planet operates on, descends from the width of a northeastern English coal wagon, plus a 1/4 inch tweak for cornering. If you've come across a tidier account of where that 1/2 inch originates, I'd honestly love to see it. Leave it in the comments. Now, the Roman legend does contain one genuine grain of truth, and it's precisely the part that deceives people. The gauge genuinely lands near the width an old cart pulled by 2 horses would need, but not because anybody was copying Rome. A cart in Roman Italy and a coal wagon in Georgian England were answering an identical question. Each was drawn by a pair of harnessed horses, and a pair of horses occupies about that much width. Identical constraint, identical answer, separated by 18 centuries. The resemblance is authentic. The inheritance is not. So how did an accidental number conquer the globe? Through the force engineers know as path dependence. When enough of something already exists, copying it costs less than fighting it. Stephenson built the first great intercity railway, and every piece of equipment in his workshops was made to his gauge. Anyone who wanted a Stephenson locomotive, which meant practically everyone, had to lay track that fit one. The gauge traveled because the hardware traveled. It's the same mechanism that locked the world onto the QWERTY keyboard. Not the best possible layout, simply the one with too many typists trained on it to abandon. Standards win by arriving early and multiplying, not by being right. It didn't spread without a fight. Brunel's 7-foot broad gauge remained in service, still superior on speed. Wherever the two networks touched, mayhem followed. Every passenger and every crate had to be unloaded from one train and shifted to another because the wheels of one system couldn't ride the other's rails. The most notorious bottleneck was Gloucester, where the two systems met head-on, and every through journey dissolved into a scramble of porters, luggage, and unhappy passengers changing trains. Newspapers of the day turned the station into a national symbol of the absurdity, complete with illustrations of mountains of misplaced luggage and families hunting for their trunks. Britain named the conflict the Gauge War, and in 1845 a royal commission convened to settle it. The commission even staged comparative trials, and the broad gauge machines won the speed contests. Robert Stephenson, George's own son, was summoned to defend the family dimension, and he essentially failed, all but conceding there was no sound justification for so odd a figure. The commission concurred. It openly acknowledged that Brunel's broad gauge represented the better engineering, then recommended abolishing it regardless. The reason? By that point, standard gauge track already outnumbered broad gauge in the ground by a factor of 8. So, in 1846, Parliament passed the Gauge of Railways Act, requiring that new passenger lines in Great Britain be laid to Stephenson's dimension, and turned the accident into statute. The same act, in a detail almost nobody remembers, fixed Ireland at 5 feet 3 inches, a compromise split between the incompatible Irish lines already built, which is why the island runs on its own orphan measurement to this day. One law, 2 accidents. Brunel's empire held out for decades. but the ending was written. Over a single weekend in May 1892, thousands of workmen descended on the last broad-gauge main line to Penzance and shifted it to standard in about 2 days. And the better engineering was gone. From there, British engineers exported the Survivor across the planet. The width of a northeastern coal wagon became the gauge of more than half the world. More than half, but not all. And the exceptions tell their own stories. Russia settled on 5 feet, a choice usually credited to George Washington Whistler, the American engineer advising the Moscow to St. Petersburg line, and later wrapped in its own legend that the Tsars picked a different width to stop invaders running trains into Russia. Sound familiar? Gauges attract myths the way magnets attract filings. And that Russian 5-foot frontier still bites today. Where the former Soviet network meets China's standard gauge, entire trains pause at the border for hours while cranes lift each carriage off one set of wheels and lower it onto another. The gauge war never really ended, it just moved to the frontier. Spain and Portugal ended up wider still, at 1,668 millimeters, which is why changing trains at the French border was a ritual for generations. India adopted 5 feet 6 inches for its trunk routes. Japan, counting costs in the Meiji era, went the other way and built narrow 3 feet 6 inches, a gauge cheap to lay through mountains. Push that logic further, and you reach the true miniatures, meter gauge across swaths of Africa, India, and Southeast Asia, and 2-foot lines like the Darjeeling Railway climbing the Himalayan foothills or the Welsh slate railways threading quarry valleys. Gauge, it turns out, is an economic style. Turn it down, and the railway gets cheaper, slower, and able to corkscrew up a mountainside. Turn it up, and you buy speed and stability at brutal cost. Nearly everyone left the dial where Stephenson happened to set it. And Australia managed the most spectacular own goal of all. Its colonies picked 3 different gauges before they were one country, and a traveler from Sydney to Melbourne changed trains at the border until 1962, when a single standard gauge link finally joined the 2 largest cities. America fought its own version of the war. Early U.S. railroads were a patchwork. The Erie ran a 6-foot gauge, and the South built its network to 5 feet. The ending came with brutal efficiency over 2 days at the close of May 1886. Southern railroads converted roughly 11,500 miles of track, crews walking the line and levering one rail a few inches inward, mile after mile, until the South matched the North. The target they levered toward was actually 4 feet 9, the working dimension of the mighty Pennsylvania Railroad, close enough that wheels rolled onto standard track without complaint, and the last fraction of an inch dissolved quietly in the years that followed. An entire region regauged in about 36 hours, because being connected had become worth more than being different. Which finally delivers us to the space shuttle. The celebrated closing claim says the shuttle's booster rockets were dimensioned to squeeze through a railway tunnel, and that the tunnel, in turn, was dictated by the track gauge, meaning even a spacecraft carries the imprint of 2 Roman horses. This is the most elegant error in the whole chain because it silently substitutes one concept for another. Track gauge is the space between the rails. Loading gauge is the size of load that can clear the bridges and tunnels surrounding the track. They are not the same thing, and an enormous load can ride on narrow rails. The boosters themselves were considerably wider than the rails beneath them. They moved as oversized freight. There's a kernel of reality here too. The booster segments were manufactured in Utah and did travel by rail toward Florida, and the route's clearances, including mountain tunnels, genuinely mattered to their design envelope. But that constraint belongs to the loading gauge, not to the modest distance separating the wheels, and loading gauges vary wildly on identical track. American railroads stack shipping containers too high on the same rail spacing that squeezes British trains through Victorian tunnels so tight they dictate the shape of the carriages. Britain's clearances are the tightest of any major network for the simple reason that it built first, back when trains were small, and every bridge and tunnel since has been a hostage of that head start. Same gap between the rails, utterly different sizes of what rides above it. And here's the final twist: the legend never reaches. When engineers finally got the chance to start over, they chose the accident on purpose. Japan, after 90 years on its narrow colonial gauge, built the Shinkansen in 1964 at 4 feet, 8.5 inches, because by then the world's fastest technology, equipment, and expertise all assumed it. Spain, wedded to its broad Iberian gauge for a century and a half, laid its entire high-speed AVE network at standard gauge. The Baltic states are converting toward it to plug into Europe, and virtually every new high-speed network on Earth, from France to China to Morocco, is drawn at 1,435 millimeters before the first shovel touches ground. Even the wildest counter-proposal in history, Hitler's fantasy of a 3-meter Breitspurbahn rolling across a conquered continent, never laid a mile of track. The coal wagon width absorbed every challenger, including the ones with armies. So here's what that gap at the crossing truly represents. Nothing about it is Roman, and nobody ever selected it. It's the width of a horse-drawn coal wagon from England's northeast, widened a 1/4 inch to get around a curve, fixed in law by a parliament that mainly wanted the quarrel finished, then hauled around the world behind British locomotives. That 1/2 inch under your feet at the crossing links a colliery horse plodding beside the Tyne to a bullet train crossing Honshu at close to 200 miles an hour. 4 feet 8.5 inches feels arbitrary because it is arbitrary. Nobody ever sat down and judged it correct. It was inherited, adjusted slightly, and then there was far too much of it in the ground for anyone to change course. The most standardized figure in transport history was an accident no one could reverse. That's how the world actually works. If you enjoy uncovering the engineering and the history sitting in plain view along the tracks, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video.